I had been working as a park ranger at Joshua Tree for over 5 years. The park's otherworldly landscape, the twisted Joshua trees, the rugged boulders, the vast desert stretching out beneath the endless sky, had always fascinated me. The place felt both ancient and timeless, a quiet beauty that was unlike anything I'd ever seen. One evening, I was sent out on a solo patrol along the Hidden Valley Trail, which winds through some of the most remote parts of the park. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the sky was painted in shades of pink and purple. The desert at night is a different world, silent, still, but full of life. As I walked the trail, I began to feel a strange sensation, like I wasn't alone. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I dismissed it at first. After all, the desert is full of wildlife: coyotes, bobcats, desert bighorn sheep, but this felt different. It was at that moment that I heard something. A rustling in the brush, too large to be a rabbit or a coyote. I stopped dead in my tracks. The flashlight cut through the darkness, and that's when I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow between the trees, tall, hunched, and massive. I thought it might be a bear, but bears don't stand like that. It was upright, walking with purpose. As it stepped into the beam of my flashlight, I saw the glowing eyes, reflective, amber, and focused directly on me. The creature stood at least 8 feet tall, with long, matted fur covering its body. It wasn't human. It wasn't any animal I'd recognized. It just stood there, watching. Then something strange happened. The air around me seemed to grow heavier, and the feeling of absolute stillness settled in my chest. I could hear the faintest whisper, as though the creature wasn't speaking out loud, but somehow inside my head. "Leave this place." The voice wasn't a sound, but a feeling, a deep, commanding presence that reverberated through my thoughts. It was like the creature wasn't just telling me to leave, but it was reaching directly into my mind, conveying its intent without words. The force of it was overwhelming, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I blinked, trying to process what was happening, but the message was clear. The creature didn't need to speak in the way humans did. It communicated directly with my mind, its words not just heard, but felt, like a warning from deep within the earth itself. "You do not belong here." The voice was stronger this time, and I could feel the ground beneath me tremble ever so slightly in response. I knew it wasn't a threat in the traditional sense. It didn't need to attack me or make a physical gesture. It was simply telling me that I was not welcome, reminding me of my smallness in the vast, ancient landscape of the desert. I took a hesitant step back, my heart pounding. The creature didn't move, its eyes still locked onto mine. But it didn't need to. It was clear that I was no longer part of its world. The feeling of its mind pressing against mine was enough to send a wave of fear over me. Fear of something primal and ancient, a being that existed far beyond my understanding. "Leave now." I couldn't help myself. My legs moved of their own accord, slowly retreating one step at a time, still feeling the presence of the creature's mind following me. I didn't take my eyes off it, but I didn't dare approach any closer either. I felt it urging me to go, a silent push that seemed to come from everywhere at once. As I slowly turned and walked away, the oppressive feeling slowly began to lift, but the presence of that creature lingered in my thoughts. By the time I reached the trailhead, I was breathless. I glanced over my shoulder once more, but there was nothing, just a wide-open desert, the soft wind, and the distant stars. I didn't report the incident. What could I say? Who would believe that a creature communicated with me without a word spoken aloud, telling me to leave? It felt too impossible, too unreal. But I know what I felt, and I know what happened. Joshua Tree is full of mysteries. Now I often wonder if it's holding on to something far older and far more powerful than we could ever imagine. Acadia National Park has always felt like home to me. The salty air from the Atlantic Ocean, the granite cliffs, and the dense forests of pine and birch. All of it feels familiar, peaceful. I've spent countless hours patrolling the trails and enjoying the tranquility of this place. But there's one section of the park, a quiet stretch of woods near Jordan Pond, where I've always felt uneasy. This particular night, I was assigned to check on some backcountry campers who had reported strange sounds coming from the forest. I didn't think much of it at first. Just the wind, I figured. But as I hiked along the trail, the woods around me seemed quieter than usual. There was no breeze, no rustling of leaves. The air felt thick, as if the trees were holding something in. Then I heard it, a whisper, so faint at first that I thought it was just my imagination. But as I moved deeper into the trees, it grew louder. The words were indecipherable, almost like an ancient language. I stopped, straining to hear, but I couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. It wasn't the wind, it was something else, something deliberate. I tried to push the feeling aside, but the whispers seemed to be all around me, echoing through the pines. That's when I saw it, a shadow moving between the trees. I wasn't sure what it was at first, but then it stepped into the clearing. It was tall, covered in fur, with eyes that reflected the dim light from my flashlight. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything I had ever seen before. The creature didn't approach immediately. Instead, it took a step back and let out a sharp, eerie howl that echoed across the forest, causing the trees to shudder in response. My legs froze in place, fear crawling up my spine. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. It took another step forward, and I instinctively backed away. But then, before I could move farther, it started throwing rocks in my direction. They landed with loud thuds in the underbrush around me, some even hitting the trees above me. It was warning me, making sure I knew I wasn't welcome. I turned quickly, heart racing, and didn't look back as I sprinted down the trail. As I reached the trailhead, I glanced over my shoulder, but there was nothing, only the rustling of leaves in the wind. Still, the howls and rocks lingered in my mind. I reported the incident to my supervisor, but when we went back, there was no sign of the creature, no footprints, no rocks. I don't think they believed me, but I know what I heard, and I know what I felt. The forest holds secrets, and some of them are better left undisturbed. I've been working in the Great Smoky Mountains for nearly 8 years now. The park is famous for its misty, cloud-covered peaks, its incredible biodiversity, and its miles upon miles of forest. I'd always prided myself on being a practical ranger. Nothing too supernatural, just the job, the trail maintenance, and the wildlife checks. Until that day, in the northern section of the park, when I encountered something that no amount of practical training could explain. The day started like any other, sunlight filtering through the mist, the smell of pine and earth filling the air. I was tasked with checking a trail that had been washed out by recent rains. The section I was on was remote, and as I made my way through the undergrowth, I came across a strange set of footprints. They were large, too large for any human, and they seemed to sink deep into the earth, as if whatever had made them was heavy, really heavy. I knelt down to examine them, but that's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl that sent a chill through my entire body. I instinctively reached for my radio, but as I looked up, I saw it, emerging from the fog between the trees. It was massive, tall, with shaggy fur, its body bulkier than any bear I'd ever seen. It stood on 2 legs, towering over me with its head just above the tree line. Its eyes, amber and reflective, glowed faintly in the dim light. I froze, unable to move. The creature didn't seem to care that I was there. It simply watched me for a long moment, almost as if it was sizing me up. Then, without warning, it let out a terrifying roar, like a storm ripping through the trees. It beat its chest with massive hands, shaking the ground beneath me. I stumbled back, heart racing, as it began to approach, its massive footfalls thundering through the forest. Before I could even react, it threw a branch, large enough to break a tree, directly at me. I ducked just in time, and the branch crashed into the ground beside me, splintering into pieces. It wasn't attacking, not yet, but it was clearly telling me to get out of its territory. I didn't wait for a second warning. I turned and sprinted down the trail, my adrenaline pumping through me. I never looked back, but I could hear its footsteps behind me until I reached a clearing and lost the sound in the wind. I decided not to report the incident. How could I? I don't think anyone out there would believe me at the time. But the forest feels different now, knowing something that big and powerful is out there. It makes me a lot more cautious on my patrols, as if the land itself might be watching me. Yellowstone National Park is a place of wonder. I've been a ranger here for over 20 years, and and every day I still find something new to marvel at. Whether it's the steaming geysers of Old Faithful or the wildlife roaming the vast meadows. But there's a part of the park that's always felt different to me, the northern part, near the Lamar Valley. It's remote, rugged, and not many visitors come this far. One summer evening, I was doing a routine check at one of the remote campgrounds in the valley. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the rolling hills. In the air had that perfect late summer chill. When I approached the campfire pits, I noticed something odd. The firewood, all neatly stacked earlier, had disappeared. All of it. In a place this remote, I knew no one would be walking off with a pile of logs. I checked the surrounding area for signs of human activity. Footprints, disturbed earth, anything. But there was nothing. No sign of anything unusual. It was like the firewood had just vanished. At that moment, I heard a low, guttural growl. It was so deep, so resonant, that it seemed to come from the ground itself. I turned toward the sound, instinctively reaching for my radio. When I looked into the trees, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A massive figure stood just beyond the tree line, partially obscured by the shadows. It was at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark, matted fur. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and I could feel its gaze lock onto mine with an unsettling intelligence. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. And I stood there, unable to move, my heart hammering in my chest. I took a cautious step forward, trying to keep my distance but also not show fear. Then, without warning, the creature hurled a large basketball-sized rock at me. It crashed into the trees beside me with such a force that I could feel the vibrations in the air. The creature made another growl, this one even deeper, and it stepped forward a few paces, its feet leaving deep impressions in the dirt. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I didn't know what to do. It wasn't attacking, but it wasn't backing down either. For a moment, I thought about reaching for my radio, but something in me told me not to. This thing didn't want to be disturbed. Slowly, I backed away, never taking my eyes off of it. The creature didn't pursue me, but it didn't leave either. It stood like a statue, watching me until I was far enough to disappear from its view. I left the area without reporting the incident to my superiors. What could I say? Or how could I even say it? No one would ever believe me. But I know what I felt, how close I came to something not of this world. And every time I return to that valley, I feel its eyes watching from the trees. I grew up in Port Angeles, just outside the boundaries of Olympic National Park. The old-timers would tell stories of the Olympic Mountain Devil, a tall, hairy creature said to roam the dense forests of the park. As a child, I dismissed it as folklore, but now, as a park ranger, I found myself thinking about those stories more often, especially after the events of last summer. The Olympic Peninsula is a place of mystery, an ancient forest where the trees stretch up like towering sentinels. When I was assigned to patrol the Enchanted Valley, I was excited. The valley, hidden deep within the park, is a quiet, secluded spot with a river running through it and waterfalls cascading down the cliffs. It's peaceful, or so I thought. I'd been walking along the trail for about an hour when I felt a strange unease. The air was thick, heavier than usual, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Normally, I would have heard the rustling of birds or the distant call of a raven, but everything was unnaturally silent. That's when I heard a faint snap of a twig, so loud it sounded like thunder in the stillness. My hand instinctively went to my radio. "Ranger Harrow to base, come in." No response. I glanced around, scanning the thick underbrush for any sign of wildlife. There was nothing, just shadows and the towering ancient trees that felt like they were closing in around me. My flashlight flickered. That's when I saw it, a shape, just beyond the reach of my beam. It was tall, far taller than any human, and it moved like a shadow through the trees. It was almost invisible at first, blending in perfectly with the darkness of the forest. But then I saw its eyes, glowing amber eyes, reflecting off of my light. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature didn't approach. It didn't make a sound. It just watched me. The intelligence in its eyes was undeniable, and for a moment, I felt like I was staring into something ancient, something not quite of this world. But then, suddenly, it let out a bone-rattling growl, a deep, primal sound that vibrated in my chest. I took a step back, instinctively reaching for my sidearm. The creature shifted, moving closer with terrifying speed, and I could hear it snapping branches underfoot. In a flash, it hurled a large rock at me, missing only by a few inches, but sending a spray of dirt into the air. I stumbled back, fear overwhelming my senses. It wasn't backing down. It was warning me, making sure I knew it didn't want to be seen. I didn't wait any longer. I turned and ran as fast as I could, not looking back until I was safely back at my truck. I never reported the incident out of fear of losing my job at the park. I don't think anyone would have believed me 100%. But the memory of those eyes and that growl still haunt me whenever I patrol those woods. Thank you guys for listening to those 5 park ranger Bigfoot encounter stories. If you made it to the very end, I appreciate you so much for sticking it out and listening to all 5 of those encounter stories. Me personally, I believe it was the second story, the one that was located at Acadia National Park in Maine, just because I feel like I could I could picture it a little better for what the ranger was describing, just because I have been to Acadia National Park myself. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite encounter story was, and until next time, this has been Spook Lagoon.